1967, the National Education Association's Executive Secretary Sam Lambert commented, and I quote, "The National Education Association will become a political power second to no other special interest group. NEA will have more and more to say about how a teacher is educated, whether he should be admitted to the profession, and whether he should stay in the profession." 1968, Elizabeth Coons became the head of the National Education Association, making teacher power the rallying cry of her administration. She advocated that teachers organize, agitate, and strike. She also promoted the kibbutz concept. On September 23rd, she addressed the American Association of Colleges for Teacher Education and stated, quote, "The National Education Association has a multifaceted program already directed toward the urban school problem, embracing every phase from the Head Start program to sensitivity training for adults, both teachers and parents," end quote. In 1969, in January, Today's Education, published by the NEA, contained an article called Forecast for the 70s by Harold and June Shane. Their article was a digest of many articles within which you can find the following comments. Quote, "10 years hence it should be more accurate to term him, the teacher, a learning clinician. This title is intended to convey the idea that schools are becoming clinics whose purpose is to provide individualized psychosocial treatment for the student, thus increasing his value both to himself and to society. Educators will assume a formal responsibility for children when they reach the age of 2, with mandatory foster homes and boarding schools for children between ages 2 and 3 whose home environment was felt to have a malignant influence, and children would become the objects of biochemical experimentation." End quote. In 1970, July the 3rd, NEA President George Fisher tells NEA representatives at an assembly that, quote, "A good deal of work has been done to begin to bring about uniform certification controlled by the unified profession in each state. A Model Professional Practices Act has been developed, and work has begun to secure passage of the act in each state where such legislation is needed. With these new laws, we will finally realize our 113-year-old dream of controlling who enters, who stays, and who leaves the profession. Once this is done, we can also control the teacher training institutions," end quote. And you wondered what happened to your children. In September, in NEA's Today's Education editorial, one reads, quote, "The change agent teacher does more than dream. He builds, too. He is part of an association of colleagues in his local school system, in his state, and across the country that makes up an interlocking system of change agent organizations. This kind of system is necessary because changing our society through the evolutionary educational processes requires simultaneous action on 3 power levels," end quote. In 1971, Rules for Radicals by socialist Saul Alinsky is published. According to Suzanne Clark in Blackboard Blackmail, John Lloyd, executive director of the Kansas National Education Association, an NEA affiliate, from February 1st, 1980 to June 1984, will say that this book by Alinsky will become the NEA's Bible. In Alinsky's book, which has an acknowledgement to Lucifer at the front, he asserts that, and I quote, "Any revolutionary change must be preceded by a passive, affirmative, non-challenging attitude toward change among the masses of our people." He continues to say that the radical organizer, dedicated to changing the life of a particular community, must first rub raw the resentments of the people of the community, fan the latent hostilities of many of the people to the point of overt expression. He must search out controversy and issues. An organizer must stir up dissatisfaction and discontent. He knows that all values are relative. Truth to him is relative and changing, end quote. Perhaps, folks, not coincidentally, at about this time, Health, Education, and Welfare lets contract number OEC-080603-4535-010, under which portions of Training for Change Agents, 1973, by Ronald and Mary Havelock, will be developed, and in which one reads, quote, "The advocator, organizer, agitator, ADORAG, and social architect change agents would receive training in value clarification. Because of his political and ego strength, the ADORAG is relatively invulnerable to the system. He's able to ride or create a crisis to escalate frictions and protests. Knowledge of the law and strategies of confrontation and civil disobedience will be extremely helpful. 3 to 6 crucial school districts in one state would be identified in which inside and outside change teams would work on their projects," end quote. In the spring of 1974, the Federal Office of Education will give a grant of $5.9 million for 500 change agents to be trained at 21 institutions of higher education around the country. The Commission on Professional Rights and Responsibilities, a National Education Association brochure, number 163-04940-71, lists among the Commission's purposes to, quote, "gather information about the various individuals and groups who criticize or oppose education and make resumes of their activities," end quote, and William Cooper and the Hour of the Time is way high up on their list. Schools for the 70s and Beyond, a call to action, is published by the National Education Association, and it declares that, quote, "teachers who conform to the traditional institutional mode, ladies and gentlemen, are out of place. They might find fulfillment as tap dance instructors or guards in maximum security prisons or proprietors of reducing saloons or agents of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. But they damage teaching, children, and themselves by staying in the classroom," end quote. In 1972, the National Education Association President Catherine Barron stated, quote, "We are the biggest potential political fighting force in this country, and we are determined to control the direction of American education," end quote. Now, if you would like verification to this, see A Relic of the New Age, the National Education Association, by Robert Kagan in the American Spectator, February 1982. In 1973, February the 10th, in the same edition of Saturday Review of Education, that radical feminist leader Gloria Steinem declares, quote, "By the year 2000, we will, I hope, raise our children to believe in human potential, not God," end quote. The NEA President Catherine Barron pronounces that, quote, "dramatic changes in the way we will raise our children in the year 2000 are indicated, particularly in terms of schooling. We will need to recognize the so-called basic skills, which currently represent nearly the total effort in elementary schools, will be taught in 1/4 of the present school day. When this happens, and it's near, the teacher can rise to his true calling. More than a dispenser of information, the teacher will be a conveyor of values, a philosopher. We will be agents of change," end quote. National Education Association President Helen Wise addressed NEA political fundraisers and commented, quote, "We must reorder congressional priorities by reordering Congress. We must defeat those who oppose our goals," end quote. Now, by now, ladies and gentlemen, you must have guessed that the core of the National Education Association